Good evening. I'm Teagasc, Chairman of Drinagh Co-op. So welcome to the Drinagh breeding webinar. The year is flying, so we're no sooner through calving and we're into breeding already. So it's a good thing to be thinking about this time of the year. Breeding is one of the most important long-term decisions we make as farmers to try and breed the most efficient animals for the next generations of our herds. So tonight we'll have two excellent speakers, Donagh Berry from Teagasc and Doreen Corridan from Munster Bovine. So they'll be speaking to you shortly. There is a question and answer function on your device for questions. So as people are speaking, feel free to type in your questions and I can get a chance to ask the questions in after each speaker. So like we probably have 10 minutes for after each speaker to answer questions. And look, if there's anything that pops up in your mind during any time of the presentation, just put it up there and we can ask it later on anyway. So look, I'd like to introduce the first speaker. Donagh Berry is the Senior Principal Investigator in Quantitative Genetics at Teagasc Moor Park. So his research interests are genetic and genomic analysis and evaluations, genotyping platforms, statistics, redirective modeling, chemometrics, breeding objectives and production indexes, breeding scheme design, decision support tools. So Donagh will be speaking about EBI and genomic trends, sex semen and dairy beef. So over to you, Donagh.
Thanks, TJ. And just on one of the points you made there at the very start, you know, we're coming out of the calving season and we're entering the important breeding season, is what you said. And just a piece of trivia for you. So if we know that breeding contributes around half the gains in performance that we see in most developed breeding programs, and dairy is a good example in EBI in Ireland. So assuming that farmers work 9 to 5 and the average industrial day, so 5 days a week, and assuming that they spend one whole day picking bulls, right? So you're working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday for the whole year, and you sit down for a whole day to pick out bulls. You spend just 0.4% of your time on something that we know contributes half of the gains in profit on the farm. So the point I'm trying to make is that, like, it's probably not you're flat coming out of the calving season, right? And you're going into the breeding season. You say, "Yes, I have to sit down now and do more books." But like putting the work into actually selecting these bulls, and if you want to, which bulls to mate to which cows will pay dividends, or on the contrary, could actually be completely disastrous if you do it the wrong way. Okay. So what I'm talking about are three things. What the lads asked me to talk about was dairy breeding. So just look at a bit of a recap on the EBI. Next bit on sex semen, which isn't really my area, but it's Stephen Butler's, but I have a few slides from Stephen. And then we'll finish off with beef on dairy, so or dairy beef. Okay. So just to start off with this one, I always like to put this one up because, you know, egg gets a bad press a lot of the time, but we have a massive challenge ahead of us. So if we look at just the years from the time of Christ, let's say, up until modern day, and the energetic requirements of the global human population, right? So it wasn't very much back then. Look at the way that it's increasing. And an interesting statistic is we must produce much food in the next 30 years as we did in the last 2,000 years. That in itself is a fair gauntlet to throw it out, but to add to it that we must do it in a responsible manner when it comes to animal well-being and environment, it is absolutely a phenomenal challenge. But what I'm going to show it to you, and Doreen will probably follow up on it, is it's actually a challenge we can meet pretty easily. Okay, so this is how the EBI has changed over the last 20 years. You're starting back off in the blue, and that's the old RBI. The blue is the emphasis on milk production. So back in the old RBI, those of you old enough like, as TJ would remember, the old RBI was milk, fat, protein, and protein percentage as well. And we know that had a bad effect on fertility. So we introduced the EBI in 2000, and with that we included the traits that were available to us at the time, which are calving deaths. So that enabled us to calculate calving interval and survival. And that has stood us in great stead over the last 20 years. Now what we're actually doing, and Doreen is part of the group as well, is we're actually looking at revising our fertility evaluations just to bring us to the next level. Because what we're seeing is that what we were doing has made massive strides, but the dairy farmers are so good, and you know this yourselves, that the fertility has improved so much on Irish dairy farms that calving interval isn't as fast to that next level that we really want to get to. So we're looking at new traits on that and ways to analyze it. But anyway, look, as you can see over the last 20 years, the EBI has become more holistic. It's including calving performance traits, beef merit, maintenance, animal health, and management. And there's going to be a Q&A after, so there's a Q&A there at the bottom of your screens as well. So I'd take any questions about what's missing from the EBI, or how do we come up with a weight for X, Y, or Z in the EBI. But just so you do want to challenge me or suggest what traits should be in the EBI, or maybe you might want to know what are we thinking about what should go into the EBI for the next few years, is these traits must fulfill 3 criteria, right? Firstly, obviously they must be important. And the EBI is the economic breeding index. So heretofore, all the traits or the importance has all been driven by economics, but we might need to rethink that and think about public good, socially important traits, carbon, for example, nitrogen use efficiency. So that will require a bit of a rethink. Secondly, the trait must have some genetic variability. So if I was to put 10 cloned cows in front of you and ask you to pick genetically the best one, you couldn't, because they're all genetically the same. Right? But the good news is that every trait has some bit of genetic variability. Even if it's tiny, we can make massive progress. And they would have said this about fertility 20 years ago, it is what they said, lowly heritable, only 3% of it is genetic, you can't make any improvements on it, and we've quite clearly shown we can. And the same now goes for animal health. Yes, there's massive farmer influence on animal health, but there is still a genetic component, and we know we can make genetic gain on that. The third one, which is the most difficult one, is we need to have data. So we need to be able to determine a bull is carrying good genes for health or bad genes for health. We can't just make those figures up, even though some people obviously think sometimes that we do make a lot of those figures up, but it's based on data. And the quantity of data is a huge driver of the accuracy or the reliability of those genetic evaluations. Okay. I see Doreen, when she was looking through our slides, she also has this, and this is really, really crucial. This is called a MACC curve, or a marginal abatement curve. It's just a fancy word for, abatement is a fancy word for reducing. So these are technologies that we can use to reduce our environmental footprint. And it's a little bit complicated, so let's just quickly go through it, right? The horizontal line here, anything below the horizontal, right? So EBI, improved live weight gain, great extended grazing, they all make you money, right? Anything above the line costs you money to implement. So I think there's a bit of trailing shoe here, protected urea, right? The width of these bars is how much it can improve the environmental footprint, right? So the width is how good it is as reducing the environmental load, and below the bar, the line means it also makes you money. Look where the EBI is. Really, really long, wide, which means it has a huge potential. It's up there with the likes of protected urea. It has a massive potential to reduce our environmental footprint, and it is doing that. For every €10 improvement in EBI, we are improving the carbon efficiency per kilogram of milk solids by 14%. That's what we're currently doing. The other thing, of course, the beauty about the EBI, unlike protected urea, it's below the line, which means as well as having an environmental benefit, it's economically important, and it's driving profit on farm, right? Now, the other real advantage, which isn't captured in this, is the fact that breeding is cumulative and permanent. So if you breed for 30 years, this is up to 2030. So if you breed for the next 10 years, and if you just take your foot off the gas, the gains that you have achieved will persist. It's not like protected urea, whereby you have to keep doing it every single year to get those gains. And if you stop, you go back to baseline. So breeding is, I know I might be a little bit biased, but breeding, I would argue, is one of the best, most sustainable tools to reducing the environmental footprint, while at the same time, profitability. Just look at some of the genetic trends. So the black one here is the EBI. Like it took us a while to introduce the EBI in 2000. Obviously, those either around then knew there was a bit of discussion. Oh, is fertility really important? Can breeding do anything about fertility? So it took a few years for it to crank up. But look at the space with the likes of Gene Ireland coming in here in 2006, genomic evaluations coming in around here, DNA evaluations, just driving on the genetic game. There is a perception sometimes, I think it's kind of gone now, but there was a perception initially anyway, that we were going to go backwards on milk yield. So the orange one here is a milk subindex. Look at the way it's going up really strong and linear, right? For fertility perspective, nothing was happening with fertility. If I went before this, fertility would have been reducing. But you can see, and again, people are telling me the whole time, oh, there's too much emphasis on fertility. The whole EBI is fertility. That's all we're doing is improving fertility. No, look, the two bars are going right beside each other. We're improving fertility and milk at exactly the same pace, right? Now, and another thing that people often forget, and we can come back to this later, is that this whole notion of driving milk production, you must select for high milk bulls. No. Well, yes, you can do it that way, but I would argue the easiest way to do it is actually to improve longevity. Because we know a mature cow yields around 29% more than a first lactation cow. So if you have poor fertility and you have a higher replacement rate, you have a younger herd. And on paper, in 3 or 5 day yields, oh, she's a great heifer, she's doing X, Y, and Z. But you actually displaced a cow who was yielding 29% more because of that. If we look at the other trends, look, you can see then that beef is slightly eroding. Most of that would be due to conformation erosion. But everything else is kind of holding constant. You know, the cow size isn't really changing that much. We see this again from the next generation herd perspective. It's neither going up nor it's going down. But the beauty of a thing like the EBI is that the active bull list is around 100 bulls. So we're not saying that the EBI is the be all and end all. It's a tool. And if it was the be all and end all, the active bull list would have 5 bulls, and we've said everybody has to use that. So if it's your prerogative or desire to select for smaller cows or bigger cows, more power to you. As long as you're selecting from the active bull list, I would argue, well, you can pick and choose from which are all high EBI animals. And just quickly to go through the next generation, I think that the myth of not being able to do anything from fertility from a breeding perspective is kind of gone now. But those of you that are not familiar with the next generation herd, they are the elite animals. They're in the top 1 to 3% in the country genetically, and they run alongside the national average. These are all black and whites. What you can clearly see, and this is the first tranche of the study, the next slide is the second tranche of the more recent years. It's exactly the same thing. Submission rate is up, pregnancy rate is up, final pregnancy rate is better than the national average. Quite clear. They're all managed exactly the same. So this is purely down to genetics. Looking at the most recent years again, look, it's exactly the same trend. It's actually a bit amazing to me, the consistency. If you look at it year by year, the consistency that's actually there is phenomenal. Right, so that's from the EBI perspective. Again, there's plenty of opportunities to ask a few questions afterwards. Moving on quickly to sex semen. This is Stephen Butler's, all Stephen Butler's work. This is the most recent trial. Some of you probably saw this, where they used 8,000 straws across 160 farms. And the conception rate that they got using the conventional, so CONV is conventional, 60% conception rate. That's a good conception rate. While from a sex semen perspective, it was down to 45%. And these guys would use this relative conception rate a lot. So that would be the conception rate from sexed as a function of the conventional conception rate. And they're saying 76%. So in other words, the conception rate of sex semen is 76% that of conventional semen. But there's a few things to note. What's showing you here is the variability in bulls. I don't know a huge amount about sex semen, but the one thing I keep hearing is about there's just massive variability amongst bulls, and it's really difficult to predict beforehand if that's actually going to be a good bull or a bad bull. So here we have just 10 different bulls here. The blue is the conventional semen, and this is where the bulls were actually sexed here, sexed over there, and here's where they ship the ejaculates. There's a bit of a difference, but again, what we're seeing is the sex is inferior to that of the conventional, which we kind of knew as well. And here we have the relative conception rates. So if we look at resident bulls only, what we can see from a relative conception rate is 84% versus 70%. So it is better to sex the bulls that are resident in the location of where they're going to be sexed, rather than ejaculating them in one place and shipping them somewhere else to do the sexing. The other point is the whole variability in pregnancy rate. And what Stephen has done here is he's pulled out the relative conception rates of sexed versus AI, and he's broken them into 3 groups where they're more or less the same. So you've herds here where on average the sex semen pregnancy rates were the same as the conventional. There's ones here that were in the middle, 84%. So the pregnancy rates from sex semen was 84% out of conventional, and then there's herds here where the sex semen didn't work as well. Now, going through talking to Stephen earlier about this, I said, is there any distinguishing factors that you could recognize with these herds? So I could say to you guys, look, if you're doing X, Y, and Z, probably you shouldn't be doing sex semen. It's not probably going to work on your farm. And he said, no, like he said, just look at the pregnancy rates on the conventional. These, let's call them poor herds, are actually really good fertile herds. So they're not bad farmers. If anything, they're actually probably better than the other guys. They're doing things right. So it's really difficult, again, to figure as well, is that bull going to sex well? Is he not going to sex well? But also, is that farm, is sex semen going to work very well on that farm versus on another farm? So these are Stephen's recommendations if using sex semen. Obviously, the same criteria holds. Pick highest EBI bulls and use a team of greater than 5. So we would have done the maths on bull teams for low reliability, but recently then for sex semen, and it's more or less the same thing. What you're really trying to do is you will get good bulls and you will get bad bulls. Exactly the same with genomics. Some will go up and some will go down. But what you never want is that all the bulls that you chose are shocking. Right, so you just minimize that. It's just like horse racing. You're kind of putting bets on each way, right, just to minimize that risk. From a dam perspective, for heifers, target live weights, they've hit their target live weights, so body condition score greater than 3.25, and of course they're cycling regularly. And then cows, younger cows, long-time calves, so greater than 50 days in milk is what Stephen is recommending. Good body condition score. A lot of these would be obvious, cycling regularly, and of course you don't want the ones that had difficult calving ideally or retained afterwards. So again, to minimize any potential influence, because we know on average, based on everything that I've just shown you, the conception rate is for on average reduced. So to try and minimize any impact on the calving spread in the subsequent breeding season, do it in the first 3 weeks of the breeding season, ideally in the first 10 days. They've just finished a study looking at timed AI and didn't really make any difference from a fixed time AI perspective. And of course, it can be useful, albeit more costly, so you get all your on heat on the first day of the breeding season. So that's it on sex semen. I think I've got another 5 or 7 minutes. Just moving on to dairy beef, to the third part of the talk. This is just showing you the calving of Irish dairy herds over the past 10 years. So there's a few things we're seeing here. So the blue here is the beef on dairy. So these would be your Angus on your dairy cows or your Hereford, whatever. These are the dairy in orange, and the grey one would be the total. Few things is, firstly, you're seeing obviously the herd is expanding. So we're getting more and more calvings. But secondly, if you look at that spread, even over that relatively short period, we're seeing a real tightening of that spread. So obviously, therefore, we're getting a lot of calves dropped at a very short period of time, and we're getting more of them. And we all know from economics what that actually does to the likes of price when supply overrides demand. So the challenges here are, what is the impact of this growing herd on the quality of beef, and is it at a risk of deterioration? Also, the fact that we have good fertility and survival in these cows, coupled with sex semen, is there's a way bigger opportunity to use beef on dairy, right? And the downside, of course, is, and you know, I can see the argument here, is beef is really only contributes less than 5% of the revenue of dairy herds, but dairy farmers are predominantly focused on easy calving, short gestation bulls, right? So if we want to promote the use of beef bulls, we have to remember those two criteria. criteria. Well, let's get that one. This is actual data. I thought it was just to put up because there is a notion that an Angus is an Angus is an Angus is an Angus. So if you go into a market and you see an Angus, you know what it's going to do. That's not true. There is phenomenal variability amongst the progeny of Angus sires, and this is just demonstrating it here. So I've looked at Angus out of dairy, and they were subsequently slaughtered, and what proportion of them didn't hit the carcass weight spec. So what proportion of them didn't hit the 270 kilos. These are individual bulls, so we can see one bull here, less than 10% of them didn't hit the spec. So that was a good sized bull. But there's another Angus bull here where 1/3 of its progeny didn't hit 270 kilos. So even though they're both Anguses, as 10-day-old cows, they probably look pretty similar, there's a massive variability in there. If we look at it from a conformation perspective, so in O equals, there's bulls here where 15% of their progeny didn't hit O equals, and there's other Angus bulls where only 5% of their progeny didn't. So what we have to do is we have to identify these type of bulls, remaining cognizant of the fact that it must be easy calving and short gestation. And that's what leads us to the Dairy Beef Index. So the Dairy Beef Index was launched probably around 2 years ago. It's a tool for dairy farmers to identify beef bulls for use in their herd, right? If we look, this is the relative emphasis within the index. Again, the important thing is it's trying to marry the desires of the dairy farmer, which is easy calving, short gestation, with that of the beef farmer, which is good conformation, good gestation, etc. They're what we call antagonistic. They work against each other, and you know that as well as I do. Your host is lacking that conformation from a beef perspective. So you could say, well, what are we at? Like they're obviously fighting against each other. We're going to make absolutely no progress. This is a complete and utter waste of time. If I took that argument, we wouldn't have the EBI. Right? Fertility and milk are exactly correlated in the same direction. So as we aggressively select for milk production, we go backwards in fertility. Yet with the EBI, I showed you probably my third slide, that we can improve the both of them concurrently. So I am adamant, and actually it's way easier, we can go into more detail later, but it's way easier to make genetic progress in this Dairy Beef Index, right? So we can identify, it will take time. Remember, it took a bit of time for the EBI to work too. It will take time to identify these bulls that are short gestation, easy calving, and with a beta beef characteristics. So what are we trying to do? These are all AI bulls, beef bulls. This is your short gestation, your calving subindex. So to the right, this would be more profitable. So they'd be easy calving, short gestation. And this is your beef subindex on the vertical. So what we can see quite clearly, and this is just what I told you, that as you select for more beefy bulls, they're more difficult to get out of the cow. The calving difficulty is greater, right? Now, if I go into that index or those bulls and I rank them based on their Dairy Beef Index, this is what I actually see. So the orange squares here are the lowest 20% on Dairy Beef Index, and the blue crosses are the top 20% in beef index. You're on the opposite direction. So what the Dairy Beef Index is doing is it's trying to identify animals on the top right, which are good beefing characteristics and good calving and short gestation. And we can see that that is very successful. If we actually look at it on an individual bull basis, these are the trends that would happen by selecting on the Dairy Beef Index. What you can see is from going from a bad Dairy Beef Index down to the far right to a good Dairy Beef Index, you're reducing calving difficulty. In blue, you're reducing or shortening gestation length. In black, you're increasing carcass conformation, and in gray, you're increasing carcass weight. So what the index is doing exactly what we want it to do. It's improving calving performance, so less calving difficulty, short gestation, and it's improving the beef characteristics of the subsequent calf. Yeah, I skipped that one. Actually, do I have time? No, I think I'm probably out of time. But look, no, I'm going to go through it because I think it is important. Because if you look at the Dairy Beef Index today, you might look at some of those top bulls and say, Jesus, I wouldn't touch them. There's a few up there that are howlers for calving difficulty. And okay, they have great beef characteristics, but geez, I'm not setting up calving cows. So if we look at the top 25 AI bulls based on this Dairy Beef Index and compare them to an index just on calving difficulty and gestation, so we just call that the status quo, what we do see is, yes, there is more difficult calvings associated with these higher dairy beef index. They have a longer gestation, but their carcass weight and conformation scores, like they've, what's that, 2.5 conformation scores greater. The proportion of them that are hitting the spec, so based on the current criteria, half of them don't hit the spec. If we were to select them on the dairy beef index, only 5% of them don't hit the spec, right? So again, we can see what it's doing, but we are suffering a little bit on gestation and calving difficulty. Now, what I did was I went into the EBI in the year 2003, and I took the top bulls on the EBI in 2003, and I looked at their proofs today, right? And the EBI hasn't actually changed that much since 2003, but these were the bulls that were at the top of the active bull list in 2003. They're shockers. Look at them. Calving intervals, positives. You'll never see a positive calving interval in the active bull list at the moment. Even though the EBI hasn't changed, you don't see positive calving intervals. You don't see negative survivals. But they were the bulls at the time because we just started the breeding program. And give it as 5, 7 to 10 years, we completely changed it. We didn't change the EBI, we changed the breeding program. And we now have bulls up there that are high in milk solids and good on fertility and survival. So I'm completely convinced that these calving difficulty proofs at the top, that these higher dairy beef index bulls are slightly higher in calving difficulty. I can guarantee you, I can drop the calving difficulty on those bulls very, very easy if you give me 5 to 7 years of selecting bulls and hold the carcass and drop down the calving difficulty and improve gestation. So with that, TJ, I think it's pretty clear. I think most people are well bought into the fact now that the EBI is delivering what it says it is. We've done so many different validations, they're all saying the same thing. It is improving the carbon efficiency. Can we do better? Yes, I think we probably can, and we should aim to. Sex semen is a viable option, especially early in the breeding season, and I really believe that dairy beef has a massive potential. So that's it, TJ, if there's any questions.
Okay.
Over time.
No, you're fine. Thanks, Donagh. I suppose you put up a graph there of the trends in the breeding, that like the continued improvement. I mean, can that continue in the current rate of improvement? And like, where does it, like, is there ever an end, or what's the end game? I mean, when does it hit a plateau, or what's the ideal cow, or do you see that just continuing on the same trajectory as it has been?
It will always continue, TJ, as long as the goods are there. And just to give you an example, corn, there's a famous experiment in corn that started with 6 ears of corn. They're now on 117 generations, and they're going as fast now as they were back at the very, very start. So as long as you maintain inbreeding at a relatively low level, which we are, it is increasing by around 0.1% per year. As long as you maintain that inbreeding, you always have the genetic diversity, and that allows selection. So you have around 200 to 400 mutations yourself that you didn't inherit from your parents, which is new genetic variability. There was originally a concern, I don't know if you remember back, TJ, when Oman came to the fore, and the top 24 bulls, top 23 of the top 25 bulls were Oman sons. And the 24th fellow was Oman himself, and people said, absolute disaster, we're screwed, inbreeding, huge issue. You don't see that bloodline around anymore. Every year you're seeing new bloodlines coming in, right? Farmers don't decide on inbreeding, and this is a thing that they say, oh, I'm picking your bulls. No, you only pick the bulls that are made available to you. And the decision of inbreeding is really dictated by the breeding program. So the gene iron, which has a long-term vision of maintaining genetic diversity, so we can always get long-term genetic gain.
So it can continue, and obviously the traits that people are looking for, or the future farmers are looking for, may be different, or it depends on circumstances. So you have to aim towards, your aim might be different over time.
Yeah, look, and that's the problem with breeding. So like, there's Doreen will tell you now, there's AI bulls, black and white AI bulls picked up there obviously now at the minute, right? So it's going to be the end of the year before they produce any of the semen, goes into a cow next year. Then you got a 9-month gestation, and the heifer is born, and then the heifer has to become a cow. That's another 2 years, and then she has to start milking. So that's another 2 years. So the bulls that are being picked up today, to be fair now to the AI stations, the bulls that are being picked up today, they're not going to realize their genetic potential until 2030. So as geneticists, we have to try to picture what's going to happen in 2030. And to give you an example, and we have to take credit on this one, the A plus B minus C, we had that in the EBI from the year 2001, yet people didn't start paying for it in the year 2006, 2007. We changed it in 2007. Up until then quota was the limiting factor. But because we had a fair hunch that by 2015 quotas were going to be abolished, we changed the EBI 7 to 8 years before it actually happened. So the question then, TJ, is what does 2030 hold? And it certainly holds carbon, and I'd be full sure it holds something to do with nitrogen. So we need to be on the game, and we are working on methane and carbon use efficiency. Other ones would be animal health, well-being, antimicrobials. We're going to reduction in antibiotics. The other one, which I really don't like about the EBI, is it kind of nearly all starts once the cow calves. Like, you know yourself, what's killed you over the past month or two is the calves that won't get up and suck or drink. Like, so we need to start looking at the calves. But it goes back to my original point. Unless you're recording data on who are the lazy calves, we can't tell who are the bulls that are throwing lazy calves and get rid of them out of the breeding program.
Yeah, so it's all about the data. So the more data it goes in, the more data you can use, and the better it is for the future genetics and the future animal. Just on
but also TJ, it's more than that. It's the feedback, right? Like, it's a well-known fact that farmers recognized that fertility was reducing in the hostile before the researcher did. So what we need to know is, what are the things you're seeing creeping in? Like, is milk fever on the way up? Is grass tetany on the way up? Is any type of metabolic diseases on the way up? And then we need to try and cut it off at the pass. Like, fertility now is not solved. There's a lot of people say fertility solved. Fertility is en route to being solved, right? Our goal is to get cows to go from the current 4.2 lactations to 5.5 lactations. That's the equivalent of around 20 human years. So we're asking it's like asking our average age in Ireland at dying is 78 years of age. We're asking humans now to live till they're 98. You go to hospital today, it's full of old people, right? So health is going to be the new fertility, because our cows are going to be older and they're going to be more pressure herd sizes. So we need the data on health in particular to drive it. And that's how you're going to drive efficiencies, through health.
That leads into my next question. And you mentioned it there, the ideal age profile of a herd going forward. I mean, by increasing the age, that's obviously making things extremely more efficient than they have been in the past. And like, I mean, would that have been something that would have kind of fallen back with expansion, and that people need to really improve on that in the next number of years?
We need to be careful about this one. I made good arguments about this a few years ago on the Moore Park Open Day. So there's two statistics there, right? There's the average age of your herd, and then there's the average age of the cows that you cull. I like the second one, because if you're expanding, you have a young herd, but that doesn't mean you're a bad farmer. It just means you're expanding, right? So what you should do is look at the cows you've culled over the last 2 or 3 years. How many lactations did they achieve? If they don't achieve, so like a heifer roughly costs around 1,540 euros to get her in calf and calf down. It takes 1.63 lactations to pay back there. So if your cow doesn't achieve the second half of her second lactation, you actually lost money on her, right? So on average, Irish dairy cows are living for around 4.2 lactations, but we want them to live for 5.5 lactations. How I came to that is the replacement rate, most people would say, is 18%. Divide 1 by 0.18, you get around 5.5, right? So you might say, Jesus, 4.2 to 5.5, that's a big feat. We lost a whole lactation between the years 1990 and 2000. So we can easily gain it back, like. And you talk about efficiencies, economic efficiencies and carbon efficiencies. You have this heifer doing nothing for you for 2 years other than burping and eating, right? And you want to dilute that over subsequent years. Now, as I said, older cows, bigger challenges. They're going to drop in milk yield after 5 to 6 lactation. We're working on that. Massive variability amongst sires and hold their persistency of yield across lactations, cell count, health, feed legs, the other support. I think we need to start looking more at these confirmation traits. And that's what we're looking for. The point I made to you was, we need you guys to be telling us, lads, the bags are dropping on these cows once they get to 6, 7 lactation. You need to do something about it.
And just a question on milking speed. I mean, if milking speed is very fast, especially for milking heifers, it's hard to keep clusters on them. Like, I mean, obviously there are other traits as well that you're trying to be on top of everything.
Yeah, so we're unique in the milking speed genetic evaluation that we do. So I was very careful about this, knowing the fact that the weak sphincter muscle at the bottom of the teat gives you faster milking speed, but it allows the bacteria to go up. So what we actually have done, and also it's easy to get a fast milking cow. You just select for a goat and she'll be in and out in no time. So our milking speed genetic evaluation are independent of somatic cell count or other health, and it's independent of milk yield. So if you aggressively select for somatic cell count or for milking speed, it should have no effect on cell count or milk yield.
Will the calf market repay the dairy farmer for using the better beef bull, or is an Angus calf still an Angus calf?
This is the mindset, and look, most guys know themselves. They have repeat buyers, right? Lads that just was buy. Once one fella's calves come in, there's massive lad bidding for them because they know that they are quality calves. And we have developed a tool where, like, those, I don't know if anybody's into any bit of sort. Well, no, it's the same with the EBI up in the market. It's where we have a tool developed that will give you the carcass potential of each of those calves. Now, this kind of, it'll be supplemented or supported by the genotype of the animal. If you have the genotype of the animal, then you know the parentage. Like, for example, in dairying, around 7.5% of the parentage is incorrect. Beef, it's actually worse because dairy farmers don't tend to record the beef for multiple reasons, one of which, of course, is the fact that they might have 2 or 3 bulls running with the herd, so they can't record the parentage.
People are people shying away from genomics recently, like towards daughter proven, or have you any view on that? Like, or
I don't have any data. I don't think they are shying away. I think the last day I saw was they weren't shying away. There's just people talking about it, I guess, about the confidence on it. And look, there's a number of reasons for it. I think there may have been a perception at some stage that genomics was 100% accurate and bulls don't move. That was never true. That's why we were recommending using team of bulls. Also, when you actually look into the data, we would have recommended a minimum of 4 bulls. What some guys were doing was they were inadvertently a lot of the time choosing 4 bulls, all right, to keep their Teagasc advisor happy, but the 4 bulls came from the one sire, and that one sire was genomic. So once that one sire dropped, all the 4 bulls dropped. The other thing that guys were doing, and I know they might deny it, but the data says otherwise, is they were using the 4 bulls again, so they could go to the discussion group and say, oh yeah, using a team of 4 bulls, but 95% of the cows were mated to one of them, and 5% to the other 3. So really, they were using a team of 1. And when those bulls dropped, it obviously had implications. Like, nobody has ever rang me to date about a genomic bull that went up, even though they do go up, right? The only ones that people worry about are the bulls that go down. And yes, they do go down. That is a well-known fact. We've modified the genetic evaluations this year to reduce the emphasis on genomics. I won't go through the details unless you want to about why that is actually happening. But still, when you look at the data, several years after the genomic evaluations, the farmers that use the genomic bulls are faring better than those that don't. Now, I don't want to be seen to be ramming genomics down people's throats. It's exactly the same argument as crossbreeding. You don't have to go all genomics, all daughter proven. You can do a mixture of both. If you go genomics one year, you don't have to always use genomics the next year, same as crossbreeding. So it's farmers' prerogative, and that's why there is an active bull list with 100 bulls, all shapes and sizes, all different breeds, and also some are genomic and some are daughter proven.
Super. I'm conscious of time. We could stay asking questions all night, Donagh, because it's good to get the information. What roles do you see the environmental sustainability having in the breeding of the future? So look, that's probably a big question as well. But look, we'll finish up on that one for a moment.
Yeah, if I was a betting man, breeding is the way to solve the carbon. Definitely, and the nitrogen. Like, people are talking a lot about methane and that, and leave them off with it, because I think a bigger and more immediate issue is probably nitrogen. And we're starting work on nitrogen use efficiency at the moment. We have some work ongoing on the methane side of it. But I showed you from the MACC curve, like the potential, like the thing about protected urea is some guys will use it, some guys won't. Everybody has to breed the cow. Everybody. So if we can get good genetics up there, right, and lads would say, I don't use AI, I use stock bulls. But the stock bull came from an AI bull, right? So if we can get the top of the pyramid and drive it on, it'll flow naturally, and it culminates over time. That's the beauty about breeding, is you build on it year on year on year on year. So to me, breeding is I would say the biggest silver bullet that there's going to be from a carbon and an animal well-being perspective.
So it's a rising tide anyway, should carry a rising tide at the elite level, should carry the breed in general forward. Obviously,
there's no should, it will.
It will, yeah. Okay, that's good news on that one. Thanks, Donagh. Look, I'm sure I suppose the questions are flying in, so we'll be we might get another.
I'll here anyway.
Perfect altogether. So look, our next speaker is Doreen Corridan from Munster Bovine. So look, Doreen is working with Munster in Mallow, and she advises dairy and suckler farmers on genetics, animal breeding, animal health issues. Doreen is a strong advocate of health planning to maximize farm efficiencies and output. In addition, she is a regular contributor to several farming publications and has served on the board of the ICBF from an organization in 2001 to 2012, and is currently a member of the ICBF Technical Advisory Group. So you're very welcome, Doreen.
Thank you, TJ. Can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear.
Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you tonight about dairy cow fertility. I used to love going down to Drinagh. It reminds me a bit of at home in North Kerry. So I mean, meeting somebody there one-to-one in the office, and also down to the West Cork Hotel there in the evening. And I must say, I was always treated very well down there. So basically, we're pre-breeding season now. So I mean, we're here the 24th of March. So I'll just go through a couple of things, you know what I mean, that we can do, you know what I mean, that would benefit you for 2022. So basically with the dairy Herdowner's needs, here we have Trevor Draper. So, you know what I mean, with a family farm, the most important thing is a good work-life balance. You know what I mean, that is important. And family farms and all farms have to be profitable. They have to be healthy places to work, to be able to attract, you know what I mean, labour and work in there. We need to be able to protect, you know what I mean, our assets, reduce the overall time working per cow, you know what I mean, and try and introduce lean farming. You know what I mean, so the key is how do we get this, and how can we work the breeding season, you know what I mean, to help us with that. Donagh went through this, which is the MACC abatement curve, which clearly shows, you know what I mean, the dairy EBI has been absolutely key. And Semen is there as well above the line. So, I mean, it has a cost. And then if we look at the top one, which is the roadmap to 2027, what we clearly see there is milk solids. We need to increase them on average per cow from currently 417 up to 465. We need to increase the EBI from a herd average of 90 up to 140. And we also need to increase our 6-week calving rate from 62 up to 78. And all these are really going to help us actually with the environment, because what we have to do is we have to farm profitably, but we also have to take, you know what I mean, the environment and the welfare into account. And so these are our challenges. Then if we look at our food we're actually producing, our USP, so I mean in Drinagh and in Carberry, is grass-fed. 95% of the diet is grass-fed, and trying to get, you know what I mean, the 250 days. So it's all about trying to get that grass diet into cows. And if we're looking at getting that grass diet into cows, so I mean, the grass grows, so I mean, from February to October. So what we basically need to do is to align the cow requirement, so I mean, with the actual grass growth curve. So we're basically calving at the moment in a block, and then we're conceiving in a block, and then we're actually drying off. So to really get the grass fed, so I mean, the 6-week calving piece is absolutely crucial. Is that we are going to calve in a block, conceive in a block, and actually dry off in a block. So I mean, so that is the key, that it's actually grass fed. Now, we analysed 4,500 spring milk herds. So I mean, and Mags below ICBF helped us quite a bit with it. And roughly it costs about 250 kilos of milk solids to maintain a cow. So if we take, so I mean, any cow in the herd, even in a low cost herd, was costing €1,100.88. And if you look at 100 cows in a herd, so I mean, how much are they leaving, right? So if we take, but we have to be careful as well not to confuse profit with production. But if we look at the bottom 20% of herds producing 264 kilos of milk solids, like they're making no money. They're only making 7,500 for 100 cows because it's costing them that amount to actually maintain the cow. But if you take the average guys at 400, so I mean, they're making 1,900 a cow. So I mean, 100 cows, they're making 73. And as you move up along the line, so kilos of milk solids is absolutely key to drive it, but we have to produce it profitably and produce it from grass. And if we look then at the Drinagh figures, the Drinagh average is 400 kilos of milk solids sold per cow. And if we come back here, which is, so I mean, the average, which is spot on with the 4,500 spring milk recorded herds we looked at. So the milk value is about 1,900. Do you know what I mean? So what they leave is about 73,000 from the 100 cows. Do you know what I mean? And that's outside the labour and tax and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, there is a huge way you could actually go to actually improve the profitability in those herds. So then if we look at the Drinagh average for fat and protein is 400 kilos, right? The top 10% is 497. And then if we look at our roadmap, so I mean, we need to go by 2027 up to 465. So we need to improve our kilos of milk solids per cow, right? The other thing we need to do, so I mean, is the Drinagh average in the cell count is a little bit high, 162. We need to actually to pull that down. Then, if we look at the actual EBI, so I mean, the Drinagh average is 116. So I mean, which is quite good, but we need to get that up to the 140. But look at the 6-week calving rate. It's at 62%. We need to lift that up to 78. And the other thing is, look at the percentage of heifers that's calving at 22 to 26 months. The Drinagh average is 64. So there's quite a few areas we need to improve here. We need to improve the milk solids. We need to improve the 6-week calving rate. And we need to improve the percentage of heifers calving at 22 and 26 months. And if we improve that, that'll really actually help with carbon. So the first place to start is if you're on Herd Plus, or if you're not on Herd Plus, get on Herd Plus and go in and look at your EBI scorecard. See, what are you 5 stars for, what are you 3 stars for, and what are you 1 star for? And that'll really help you with the selection of the panel of bulls. So I mean, how are you on the milk sub-index, fertility sub-index, do you know what I mean? And then you have maintenance and beef and so forth. But the 2 most important ones are milk and fertility. How are you in both of those? So I mean, and clearly have a look, so I mean, where you are in that, right? And that will help you to actually select your panel of bulls for this year. Now, if you're one of the average herds at 400 kilos or less, you ask yourself, why are you actually low? So I mean, is it the genetics, which your profile will tell you? Second reason why you're low is the herd too young. Because as Donagh said there, if you have a young herd, you know what I mean, you are going to be producing less. Second thing, is it your days in milk? Have you too little days in milk? Because the cow that calves in February is a long ways ahead in days in milk of the cows, I mean, the calves in the April and May. And the other thing you need to look at is, look at your replacement heifer management, because we want the first lactation heifers, so I mean, to be over close to 78% of the mature cow. And in a lot of herds, we see that in the high 60s, low 70s. And the other thing we see with replacement heifers, an awful lot of them are not calving in the first 4 weeks of the season. So if your production is low, first you look at genetics, is that where it is? Second thing, look at herd maturity. Third thing, look at days in milk. And then look at the replacement heifer management. So now, we hit the breeding season. There's an awful lot we can do here as we hit the actual 2021 breeding season. As each of us at the moment in our farm, we have maiden heifers, we have calved cows, and we have cows yet to calve. So I'll go through the 3 of those now and to know what can we do with each of those groups. So the first thing is the maiden heifers. We have 2 groups of maiden heifers in our farm. We have the bulling heifers, so I mean, we're getting ready to bull, and we have the calves. And the key with these, so I mean, as Donagh says, we want to keep them to last for an average of 5.5 lactation. So really try and address, so I mean, the scald pneumonia in those calves up to now, but also from now on. But for our maiden heifers, the most important thing we can do at the moment is get them weighed. Where are we? Right, because if we have a maintenance at 10, we're talking about a 600 kilo cow. We want to have the calf at 5.33. At breeding, we're talking about a target weight roughly at around 350, right? And get those out to grass straight away. As if you get those heifers out to grass straight away, they'll gain 1 kilo a day. And what we want to do with those maiden heifers, we need to calve them all in February. As maiden heifers calving in March, April, do you know what I mean? They're starting late. It's going to be very hard to actually get them to bring them early. And the other thing is, if you calve them all early, you'll end up with an awful lot of less issues with cell counts and so forth. So with your maiden heifers, the first thing is weigh them, get them out to grass, they'll get 1 kilo a day. If some of them are well underweight, the smaller ones, pull them out, put them in a separate paddock and give them a bit of extra feed at grass. So that's the first thing with the maidens. Second thing with the maidens, get your vaccinations completed now. So I mean, we're only the 24th of March at the moment. You probably won't be breeding until 24th of April and May. So get the vaccinations into them now. If you have surplus heifers, so I mean 10 or 20% of your heifer surplus, and you want to sell them, as those heifers are selling well now, get the heifers genomically tested. So at least you're keeping the best of them for yourself, right? Then select your sire and stock bull, and I'll just do a little bit about that. And the most important thing for the maiden heifer is make sure you put an easy calving sire on her, because there's nothing worse than, I mean, wrecking a heifer in her first calf. And then plan the breeding season. Where are they? Outside farm at home. Will I synchronize them, won't I? What heat detection aids do I put on them? And if I'm letting off a stock bull, how do I monitor them? So basically, for your group of maiden heifers now, weigh them. If they're small ones, I'll pull them out and feed them. Get the vaccinations done. If you have surplus ones, get them genomically tested now, so you'll have the results back before you sell them. Get the sires selected for them and plan the breeding season, right? There were new proofs out there. So basically, for the easy calving, these are the panel of easy calving bulls we have. There are still records coming in. You can see there, so I mean, there are bulls there with 15,000 records, 18,000 records, so I mean, down to about 1,100 records. These are guaranteed low risk for maiden heifers, right? And they are what we need to use. Equally, if you're going out buying a stock bull for maiden heifers, if you put the stock bull's tag number into the ICBF animal search, it'll tell you whether the bull is low risk, medium risk, or high risk for maiden heifers. So that's the piece on the maiden heifers. The other group of animals that you have in your farm at the moment are the calved cows. So we're a month out from the breeding season. So the first thing is, what can we do with actually these calved cows? The most important thing we need to do with them is to maintain body condition score. That is absolutely key. So the question is, how do we maintain body condition score on these calves now, on these cows now? So some of you are in by night at the moment, right? So look at the silage you're feeding. If you're in by night at the moment and you're doing 24 kilos, so I mean, you want to be feeding about 6 kilos of concentrates. If you're on 74 DMD silage. If you're in by night and 26 kilo, you want to be feeding 7 kilos. For those of you then that are out full time, the big thing is it's all about matching input with output, right? So if you're on 26 litres and the cows are taking in 12 kilos of grass, I mean, given 6 kilos, you're up to 15, they'll work away in 2 kilos. But the important thing is the cow that's calved since the 1st of February, right? She's calved a good 8 weeks now. That cow will have massive intakes. So I mean, so she'll be able to take in, so I mean, 16 kilos of grass, 15, 16 kilos, no bother. The freshly calved cow is going to be up here. She will not be able to get in the intakes of grass. So from now until the breeding season, maintain body condition on those cows and be really careful of the cows that are freshly calved to make sure that they're actually fully fed. because they're the ones we don't want to lose body condition score. Now, the cows yet to calf, these are a bunch of cows we need to watch, because what we need to do at the moment is the bunch of cows you are actually going at the moment with that you're going to milk in 2021. Ideally, we want to keep over 82% of those for next year. So we want to keep 82% of the cows you're currently milking for 2022. So really watch the cows that are yet to calf. So the first thing to avoid is high body condition score, right? And those cows are gaining weight like hell at the moment. So restrict them. Do you know what I mean? Feed them straw. And if the other cows are out by day at the moment, it's very easy to restrict cows when you have plenty of barrier space, because you can give them the barrier space during the day. Do you know what I mean? Restrict them up at night, right? Feed them straw. Do you know what I mean? If you can. But once they're within 10 days of calving, do not restrict anymore. Feed them fully, because we do need to feed them fully within the 10 days of calving. Next thing we need to do is make sure we completely avoid milk fever, because as cows get on in body condition score, they're more prone to milk fever. And also with cows out to grass by day or full time, the cows inside may not be getting their full allocation of minerals. So really watch the actual milk fevers, because milk fever is going to lead to metritis, retained afterbirths and so forth. So the cows yet to calf, watch the body condition score and try and avoid milk fevers and retained afterbirths. Restrict them, avoid them getting heavy, but the most important thing is feed them fully in the last 10 days before calving. Now, so as I said, the bunch of cows you're going to milk in 2021, we have to keep 82% of them for 2022. So the late calving cows are a great bunch of cows if you can hold on to and pull them forward. So watch the body condition score, watch the nutrition in them after calving, because their intakes are not going to match the early February calving cows. And one thing you could do with those is put them on once a day, because what once a day does is reduces the output, keep up the input. They will not lose body condition score and they'll come bulling early. And these are the cows I would get vet examined and metri checked, drum in and treated if necessary pre-breeding season, because you are a race against time with those. They're also very good candidates for synchronization and fixed time AI and get an early scan into them. But those late calvers, that 5-point plan for them works very well. As the more of those we keep in the herd, the more milk we will produce in 2022, because otherwise we'll have to replace them with an actual in-calf heifer who will not have as much milk. Sex semen, Donagh covered the vast majority of that. The one thing I'd say is your herd a suitable herd for sex semen? Because what Donagh went through there was the sex semen trial in that herd, and that herd that was done in 2019. And in that sex semen trial, they were all high fertile herds that were actually selected. So I'd only use sex semen in herds that had a very high 6-week calving rate, that had a good fertility subindex. Use them in cows that's calved 90 days, 1 to 4 parity, good body condition score, no issues around calving. If you want to use it in heifers, make sure they're up to the target weight, accurate heat detection, and synchronization has a great role to play with sex semen. Because firstly, it gives you more precise timing of AI, but also it gives you an extra service in the first 3 weeks. So try and limit your sex semen to the first 3 weeks. If you use synchronization with it, you've all your cows bulling, we'll say the 1st of May for argument's sake, and you need the repeats around before the 22nd. So the synchronization helps by giving you an extra service in the first 3 weeks, right? And also with sex semen, play it by ear, in the sense that use it in cows, I mean, and heifers, as Donagh says, they have 14 to 20 hours after being in the heat. So if your technician is coming in at 9 o'clock every day into your yard, the very fresh ones, give them conventional semen. The ones that are 14 to 20 hours gone off heat, give them the sexed. Equally, if you had a bunch of heifers lined up and had them synchronized, and the weather went against you or the grass went against you, and you knew that, I mean, they just were not doing well, and you didn't get a good response to the synchronization, let the sex semen there. Use conventional. I mean, so be prepared to be adaptive, and it works reasonably well. The big advantage, it reduces down daily dairy born male calves. The disadvantage is the variability. Get over the variability by having a range of the bulls and stacking the odds against you, or stacking the odds with you. And if things are going against you, don't use it. It's more expensive, bit lower genetic merit, and a limited number of sires. Donagh went through that, the relative conception rate. Now, with tail paint, today is the 24th of March. In the next week, definitely consider tail paint in the cows. But one thing that really works while doing, clip the tail heads before you put on the tail paint. As if you clip the tail heads before you put on the tail paint, cows will, the tail paint will come off very clean. If you do not clip them and you have hairy tail heads and you put on the paint, and as you keep painting it, you get layers and layers of paint coming on, going on, and it's very difficult to actually remove that tail paint. Vasectomized bull, they're absolutely brilliant. So I mean, for heat detection, let him with maidens for the first 4 to 5 weeks, and then let him with the cows. So if you haven't got one, keep a couple of your early male calves. So I mean, to get them vasectomized for next year. They're absolutely super from the point of view of actually heat detection. And as herds get larger, it's harder and harder to keep stock bulls sound, right? So get vasectomized bulls. So I mean, and the number depending on the size of the herd. And if they get hurt, it's not as much of a loss, so I mean, as a stock bull you actually have purchased. I mean, that's the best at the moment of what's out there available chin ball. But one thing to remember about chin ball paint, it's a very heavy oil-based paint, much heavier than any of the tail paint you use. So when you're starting off the season, put it into a bucket of warm water and really, really shake it. Because if you don't, the first couple of fills of the chin ball will be heavy oil coloured paint, and the second couple of fills then they won't come out of the chin ball. So just watch that. For maiden heifers, it's hard to beat stretch cards, right? They really, really work exceptionally well when heifers are out. So we'll have a breeding and fertility notes and go through it in detail. But the trick with it is spray the heifer, spray the card, and like a puncher in the bike, make sure the card is actually tacky before you actually put it on the heifer. But they work exceptionally well. And what you can see there then is that, like the lotto tickets, is the silver goes to pure red. The bottom left in there, you can see the red is nearly rubbed off to the white. So I mean, massive amount of activity there. And they come in different colors, as you see over there on the right. There are some green ones and there's some yellow, but they're absolutely super for maiden heifers. The other option is there is cranes. And for maiden heifers, especially if you're using sex semen, you could nearly use cranes and the scratch cards together because they really give you a good indication. The advantage of cranes over tail paint is they come off easier. And they're that little bit less messy to think. For any of you going expanding or doing something in the yard, try and put in a batch crush because they're quite cheap to put in. And the big thing with them is it's very easy tail painting them, very easy to scan in them, very easy to vaccinate them. So, I mean, do your TB testing them. And the big advantage is the jobs you normally don't like doing get very easy actually in the batch crush. I mean, so they're quite cheap to erect, but they really, really help you with labor and time and make cow handling very easily. Sensor technologies and drafting, so I mean, they're out there, they're working reasonably well in herds. So I mean, but there is a cost to them. Now, I mentioned synchronization there, and synchronization does work very well. The most important thing with synchronization is to follow a protocol, right? So basically, they have two methods here for heifers. The first one is you basically watch them for the first 6 days. And in the first 6 days, you should have a third them in heat. And if you haven't a third them in heat in the first 6 days, talk to your vet. Why are they not coming bulling? Are you not picking them up? Are they pre-pubertal? So I mean, have their intakes dropped? Right? Or God forbid, are they in calf already? Right? But answer that question before you go in with your shot of PG. And go in with your shot of PG day 6, day 7, day 8, or day 9. But the important thing is the day you go in with your shot of PG, make sure you're around the 48 to 72 hours later. as that's when the heifers will show heat. And the advantage of that shot of synchronization, it's one shot of PG, it costs about a £5 a heifer. It's quite cheap. And the other thing about it is repeats are coming together. You have an even bunch of heifers to scan, and it'll ensure that all your heifers are calved in the first 4 weeks of the breeding season. However, if your heifers are in an outside place, or if your heifers are at home and they're a bit away from the yard and you want to minimize the amount of handlings, or you want to use sex semen and you want more precise onset of heat, this is quite a very good program. It works very well. You put in a Prerequisite, inject the GnRH, 2 shots of prostaglandin, and second shot of GnRH then at AI at fixed time. That costs about €25 a heifer. You have 4 handlings in the crush, and then you just actually watch the repeats. Works very well for sex semen, but it also works well heifers in an outside place where you want to reduce them down. And the one thing I would say about synchronizing heifers, be very careful if you're letting off bulls to pick up the repeats, because if the bulls are virgin bulls and they haven't mated before, so I mean, you could lose some of the benefits of synchronization by not actually having picked up the repeats. Synchronization in cows, this method works quite well. Prerequisite, GnRH, shot of PG, day 7, and remove the Prerequisite. Day 9, then your GnRH 56 hours later, and AI. These will be gone out in the breeding and fertility notes, but that synchronization program works extremely well. And where I would use that in dairy cows is at the start of the breeding season, cows calf 35 days not seen in heat. It gets these cows cycling. Where I come in with it again is 3 weeks into the breeding season, cows that are calf 35 days not seen in heat, as it's getting a serve into those cows. And it'll keep some of those cows in the herd that normally would not stay in the herd, that would need to be replaced by an actual maiden heifer. Beef size for the dairy, Donagh touched on that a bit. And the big thing is the sire panel that we have is exclusively selected for the dairy herd. It ensures you have quality saleable calves, and which means you'll get repeat purchasers coming back because the calves will hit the spec in the factory. There's no compromise in dairy profitability because they are short gestation, easy calving. And the big thing is there are a large number of records for calving and carcass from the dairy herd behind these. Donagh went into that. So basically what I'd say is select the highest beef value bull you possibly can for the animal you're speaking about. So if we look at Angus's actually and Maidens, we see 2 bulls there at the very top. There's Pat and Jamie. Both of them are as easy as KYA for calving, but they have a better carcass. And they are very suitable for the younger and the lighter heifers. Matteo up here at the top is a very, very rare bull. He's easy born. So I mean, we can see there for dairy heifer, he's just 6.4% at 98% reliability. Exceptional in gestation, he's -4 days, and superb carcass. So I mean, he's +6 kilos in carcass, which is exceptional for a bull that's so easy calving and short gestation. Then these are the 4 bulls we'll be recommending for cows, right? And what we try and do in Angus for cows is try and get a 10 kilo carcass, right? Because these bulls here are 13 kilo carcass, 12 kilo carcass. So I mean a 3.2 dairy cow calving, 4.3 dairy cow calving. So they are actually quite easy. They will hit the specs in the factory. And then coming up towards the end of the season, you could drop to a lower bull and carcass weight like Maverick at 6.6 because he has that bit shorter gestation. But the important thing is, apart from Matteo, do not use bulls for maidens actually on cows. Then the Herefords. What's here is profile. He's HE5346. He's a superb bull. He's 9.3 for carcass. He's 3.4 for calving. He's -2 days in gestation, and he's polled. He's absolutely a cracker, and he's the highest DBI bull available. Now, and with Herefords, it's very difficult to get quite a high carcass weight. It's far easier than Angus. But you know what I mean? Profile, you know what I mean, is a bull that's absolutely superb. Axel, he's a Harden bull. He's quite high as well. Then the Aubrac breed is a very interesting breed from the point of view of the dairy, because they're kind of like a Limousin cross Angus, right? However, for a dairy herd that has someone buying the calves from them or that are finishing themselves, definitely use them. I would be inclined to avoid them a little bit if I was selling in the MACC, because they don't make their value. But there's a bull there, magnificent. He's 22 kilos a carcass, right? And 4.2 calving. So, I mean, super bull, one of the best Aubrac bulls out there. Then you're into bulls. Then I'd only use on very mature cows when I'm into Limousin and into Belgian Blue. The one thing about the Limousin is they add gestation, so I'd only use them at the start of the season. Zag is a great compromise. He's the most used bull in dairy for a number of years. And then in the Belgian Blues, there's a bull there, Coolbanagher King, 23 kilos a carcass, so I mean, and 7% calving in dairy cow. But again, you're into Limousin and Blue, you're always talking about the mature dairy cows. With stock bulls, if you're going out at the moment, so I mean, purchasing stock bulls, the important thing is, I always think stock bulls are a bit like Paul Gallivan, you know, heading into the Munster final. So I mean, no one taking care of his welfare, no one there to protect him, you know. So the big thing is with stock bulls, make sure you have enough bull power. Because the big thing I see with bull power is that we do not put enough emphasis on how many empty cows we have when we're letting off the stock bull. Second thing is, when you let off the stock bull, keep AIing for the next 10 days until the bull gets settled down, and essentially you're using the bull as a teaser, and that really helps the actual calf rate. Calving difficulty is the biggest hit we're seeing in fertility, and when you're buying a stock bull, especially for maiden heifers, make sure they're low risk, and also for cows, really check the calving difficulty. Check it there in ICBF. As a lot of breeders, when you speak with, they'll tell you they're easy calving, but a lot of them do not realize how easy calving they need to be for actually dairy heifers. Try and purchase the bull in advance, so you can vaccinate him whatever you're vaccinating for. He get over his nutritional stress. Always foot back the stock bull when you bring home to make sure you're not introducing Mortellaro. Fertility test him, and most important with the virgin stock bulls, make sure they can mate before you let him off with females. And this is really true in virgin heifers that are synchronized in the bull let off. Lame injured bulls have to be bought in and put on the bench, and monitor the stock bull throughout the season. Then these are the panels of the new bulls. And as I said earlier, look at your EBI profile, see what you need to improve. So there's about 15 bulls there on the panel. They average 100 sub-index in milk, 100 in fertility. So I mean, 33 kilos of milk solids. So I mean, you can talk to Declan about those. So use the panel. So I mean, and as Donagh says, sort out the sires. So I mean, and use your panel then equally. Then for those of you that want a smaller type of a cow, so I mean, there's about 10 bulls there with a maintenance of 16. Again, 102 milk solids, 90 on fertility, and you're over 30 kilos of solids. So basically we're back. So I mean that in the next 6 weeks, the key is if we can get the genetic stripe going into the cows and can get a high 6-week calving rate, it'll really set us up, so I mean, for a very, very good 2022. And the one thing I'd say is do out a plan, right? Do visit pre-breeding season. So I mean, work out what your mating start days is, right? Didn't get out your vet 3 weeks in, 6 weeks in, 9 weeks in, to try and absolutely stay on target. And remember, the 3 groups you have at the moment are the maiden heifers, the cows that's calved, and the ones that's yet to calve. So I leave it at that, TJ.
Thanks, Doreen. I suppose a few questions. What should guide, we'll say, the average farmer ahead of the breeding season into what they would be looking for? Like, is it their co-op performance report or their EBI report? Or, I mean, is it a combination of just on advice? Because look, I suppose there are lots of figures there as well, even in your last slides there of the different options, there are the different bulls. I mean, you have two different farms, and I suppose they're looking for two different things, but to be able to identify what a person is looking for and to lead them in the right direction. I mean, what would the advice be on that, or how they would go about that?
Yeah, I think the annual co-op report, which all of you would have gotten at this stage, is a very good place to start, because it will tell you what was your kilos of solids produced, do you know what I mean, for your cows for last year. Take into account whether you rear the calves or whether you actually, do you know what I mean, use milk replacer, right? It'll also tell you then your 6-week calving rate, and it'll tell you the number of your heifers that calved at 22 to, do you know what I mean, 26 months. And it's a really good place to start, because what you basically need to do is, what kilos of milk solids do you want to get? What 6-week calving rate do you want to get? And then look at how many of your heifers calved in February. And then I'd flick to my EBI report. And in the EBI report, what I clearly look at there then is, where do I need improvement? And that would tell you then what panels to select for, right? And the most important thing, pull from the easy calving panels for the maidens anyway, TJ. And then you're either a super grazer, where you're looking for a low maintenance cow, so I mean, around the 500 kilo cow, go from the super grazer panel, or else you're looking for a 600 kilo cow with that bit more production, so I mean, and look at that panel, right? And then what I'd focus on is getting those cows in calf.
And the sire advice then, the ICBF sire advice, is that, like, I mean, is that a good way to work with as well, if you could input your options into that?
Oh, it is the sire advice, because what the sire advice does is it eliminates inbreeding and it matches the cows to the sire, so you end up with kind of a uniform herd. It's really important that DIY herd owners use the sire advice, because inbreeding will reduce vitality in the herd, especially health and fertility. For herd owners and the technician service, the sire advice is built into the handheld.
Have you any advice for someone using AI only on all stock cows and heifers for the first time? Someone that never used it before, I suppose they were using bulls all the time.
Okay, so if someone is switching from a stock bull to AI, the most important thing there would be to make sure that your heat detection is very good, right? So for the maidens, what I would do is I'd synchronize them, because at least you can focus in and heat detecting the cows, and you just need them to watch the repeats, right? So I'd synchronize the maidens. For the cows, I tail paint them at the moment, and I try and do a bit of pre-breeding heat detection, because if your pre-breeding heat detection with the tail paint wasn't up to the mark, at least you know before the mating season starts, right? And then at the mating start date, I decide the mating start date, I get out the vet and I'd go through my cows that had calf 35 days not bred, right? And between both of you, you'll be able to work out, had you missed a share of cows? And then the big thing is tail paint twice a week. And if you have 100 cows, you want 90 of them bred in the first 3 weeks, so you should be getting a third of them every week. So make sure you have a third in the first week. And if you haven't a third in the first week, you ask yourself why. Don't wait till the 3 weeks to find out, right? So what I do with TJ is I'd start them off with the pre-breeding heat check to see how their heat detection was going, right? And then at the mating start date, I'd get out the vet, so I mean, to check the cow's calf 35 days not served, and also have a discussion, so I mean, with your vet to know how you're going with the heat detection. And then I'd make sure that they had a third picked up in the first week and another third picked up in the second week.
So they'd really want to be starting tomorrow morning, really, on that to get a handle on how they're going to be ready for the breeding season, if it's in, I mean, where we know near the end of March, so by the time you come to the 1st of May, just to give yourself plenty of experience and trying to pick them up as well.
That's right, that's right. And the other thing is trying to join a local discussion group, do you know what I mean? Or talk to, do you know what I mean, a local neighbour that's actually heat detecting, right? And the other thing I would do is if they tail paint, right? And if the technician is coming into their yard every morning at 9 o'clock, get someone else to milk the cows. Do you know what I mean? And let them focus on the heat detection and drafting out the cows for AI. Because that's one thing we saw last year with the COVID, there was a bit more help around for the actual heat detection.
The late calvers, Doreen, what would be the best option then to put on them? Like, would it be the short gestation Anguses, or I mean, would go down the road of using them for Frisian as breeding replacements off them, or is it better to steer away from using them for breeding replacements, the fact that they're late already?
It probably is, TJ, you know, because if you could get all your heifers born in February, you have a great chance of getting them all up to the weight. But then if you want to expand in your shot the heifers, you could probably go to the 17th of March, you know what I mean? Have a 6 weeks spreading them, because you don't want too much of a spreading heifers because it gets more difficult to actually to manage them. So for the late calvers, the important thing now is the cows that haven't calved yet, to restrict them. Unless they're within 10 days of calving, do not restrict them then. Right? Make sure they do not get milk fever. So keep the minerals up to date in them. Then if you have a couple of ladies that are that bit further on, older cows that you suspect to get milk fever, I put a calcium bolus into them at calving. Right? Then if you have a couple of cows that are actually factory fit, do you know what I mean? Because we all have a couple of those, regardless how hard we try, a keckstone bolus works quite well in those. Do you know what I mean? Because it keeps the rumen right and it provides a lot of those all metabolic stuff. The other thing with the late calvers is watch their intakes, as we cannot cut them off concentrates as we can the early calving cows, as their intakes in grass won't be that high. Put them on once a day, and you only need to put them on once a day till they actually come bulling, right? And I'd always synchronize those late calving cows once they're calved 35 days. They're cows I do a nice little bit of intervention with, as for every one of those you can keep in your herd for next year. Do you know what I mean? You avoid replacing them with a heifer, and you're going to actually end up with more milk.
And we'll say even at the moment, cows, we'll say right now that are, you know, in poor condition or maybe just struggling a little bit. And sure, look, I suppose there's often cows might have had twins or kept the cleaning, and they're just not firing all cylinders at this point in time. I mean, what would be the best advice for them right now? Them ready for the breeding.
Yeah, go through the cows, right? And the easiest thing to do is put one or two of the cows that haven't calved yet into the crush, right? And pull out a couple of thin cows and a couple of cows you think are okay, and look at them all together inside in the crush, right? And you couldn't, well, some guys said they've no thin cows, but then, do you know what I mean, compare them to the cows that haven't calved yet, or compare them to the cows that's just after calving in a couple of weeks, and then compare them to the early calving cows. So I mean, so it's all about comparison in front of you, right? But those cows that have thin at the moment, once a day works very well for those. And you can put them on twice a day then as soon as they come bulling, right? And when you put them on once a day, if the cows are still in at night at the moment, TJ, milk them at night time. So at least they're going into the cubicles with an empty bag. They're not going to leak. Don't milk them in the morning. So they're going out, and if they're going to leak, they leak out in grass. I mean, so it'll avoid SCC. But I'd only put cows in once a day that was going to keep for next year. Because there's no point putting a cow in once a day that you were going to cull at the end of the year anyway, because if her cell counter, she's kind of lame or something like that. So go through the thin ones, and any thin ones that you want to keep, so I mean, definitely put them on once a day. And you can milk them twice a day then as soon as they come bulling.
And I mean, like last week was obviously the weather was glorious, pretty much perfect for the time of year, or better than that. It's a little bit mixed this week. It's supposed to get colder. Look, April throws a lot of different weather, and so does May. Running into kind of a couple of bad weeks at breeding season, does that have an effect on the overall fertility, or is it just down more to the condition of the cows and the conditions of everything else at that point in time, or is there an extra bit of feeding needed during really, I suppose, the really hard, tough 3 weeks of the first round of breeding?
Oh, absolutely. Because what we need to do is watch the bull tank. because the bull tank is starting to settle down now at the moment. So I mean, and if the bull tank is starting to drop in volume, or if protein percentage is dropping, they're two very good indicators of energy, right? So I mean, and turn it around, is it because the grass isn't there? So I mean, or is it because we haven't get the utilization with the wet weather? So definitely supplement. So I mean, because a kilo or 2 extra at that stage, so I mean, might only be for a week or for 10 days, makes a huge difference, right? Also with maiden heifers, the one thing with maiden heifers is you can switch them on enough heat. So really watch maiden heifers. And if you're going to be using sex semen, TJ, make sure everything is right and the wind is to your back. Like if you get a right bad, horrible 10 cold days, right, and the heifer standing by the ditches, and you got a poor enough response to synchronization, I'd go conventional semen then.
And the cows that were on once a day then after they're bred, do you switch them back to twice a day straight away, or would you have to continue with that depending on their condition?
Some people wait for a couple of weeks. If grass is plentiful, weather good, cows milking well, I mean, everything looking fairly well, after bulling, I mean, you could switch them back to twice a day.
And anything we can do to minimize embryonic loss during the summer, like cows that would be bred and repeating 6 weeks or 9 weeks worse again, but like, is there anything, any silver bullet there to reduce the chances of that, or is that just something that we constantly contend with?
I suppose the first thing, TJ, is have cows vaccinated for lepto. I think, I mean, that's an important one because at least you're protecting yourself as well, right? There isn't much you can do really. Avoid inbreeding by all means, I mean, at the time of breeding. The other thing is avoiding inseminating cows that's already in calf, right? And a share of those early embryonic death teachers actually missed teats.
Okay, so so that it's been missed under 3 weeks, and it
yeah.
And depending on how busy is that time that if there are a lot of them bulling at the same time, that a cow might be missed inside in the middle of it somewhere, so that she turns up again after 6 weeks. So it is really key to really be hard on for the first 3 weeks after the start of after the second 3 weeks. So it's a really key time to keep following them.
Absolutely.
Just one more, DIY, AI versus technician. I mean, any opinions on that, or does it just depend on the individuals, or how much time they have, or how much time they have to give to it as well?
Sure, we've Dave Cliffords in every walk of life, so I mean, right? So if a guy is a genius at DIY, so I mean, by all means, let him work away. The one biggest challenge with DIY is that, like if you're playing football, the All-Ireland is usually in September, probably come back now to July, but at least you have a build-up to TJ. So I mean, you've done a bit of pre-season training, you go through the different matches up to the All-Ireland. But unfortunately, with the breeding season, you're hitting it full blast in the first 3 weeks. So if you have 100 cows, you're doing 5 a day for the first 3 weeks to get 100 done in the first 3 weeks. Then it's half for the next 3 weeks, and then it's down to a quarter, right? So that gets actually some guys, you know what I mean, right? I'd safely say, apart from a few exceptional guys, the technician service will give you higher conception rates, you know what I mean, than actually to DIY.
Okay. Look, I suppose we've been through a good bit now in the webinar. So look, to get into that stage of the evening. And look, I want to just thank yourself, Doreen, and Donagh for your time and expertise as well, because look, it's a great time to have this as well. I suppose the time hasn't changed yet either, so people have a little bit of time this time of the evening maybe to think about this as well. And I think Donagh, even from what you said at the very beginning, the amount of time that people spend going through their breeding, what was it, a day is 0.4%, is it?
0.4%. If you spend the whole day picking bulls, and if you only work 9 to 5 days a week, so it's really is 0.0004%.
Yeah, it's no, it's I suppose it's something that that's really, really important, and it's good to have your expertise as well, and for people to hear that. Look, and if I suppose if there are any more or things they can even get on to the lads there in the next couple of days as well, and they'll be back to you with any more queries that they have.
But if I could say one thing, TJ, is if you're prepared, as Donagh says, to spend the day picking bulls. I spend a third of the day picking bulls, and it's been the other 2/3 of the day planning the breeding season. When is my mating start date? What am I going to do for the cows? What am I going to do for the maiden heifers? When am I going to start pre-breeding heats? What am I going to do with the usual suspects? So, I mean, the milk fevers, the LDAs, the afterbirths, the lame ones, pre-breeding season. What am I going to do 3 weeks in, 6 weeks in, 9 weeks in? Do out a plan for the breeding season and just stick with it. Because otherwise time just passes you by and there's 7 weeks gone before you realise it.
Yeah, but look, we're halfway through spring already, and it's like the calving is only just over, and here we are heading into this again. And I thought that's great advice to make people think and try to allocate a little bit of time to it, because look, I suppose we're all guilty of that. You're busy every day, and then one thing crops up in the morning that you hadn't planned for, and all of a sudden it's evening time again, and it's fine, and there's fertilizer to be put out, and it's raining, and there's something else to be done. So look, breeding is vitally important, and that time, rather than the actual physical job of doing it, the time involved in thinking about what you're going to do is obviously way more valuable. So that's super advice. Look, thanks Doreen and Donagh, and look, I just want to thank the lads back in Drinagh there as well, Darren Lynch and Tim Regan and Seamus. And so look, have a good spring, have a good breeding season, and as well as that, to the farmers out there, look after yourselves, because look, it's been busy for the last while. It will be busy for the next while. I suppose it's generally busy all year round, but look after yourselves anyway, before you come first and foremost, before everything else, and after that, look, stay safe and have a good year. So look, thanks very much to everybody, and good night.